Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Multi-Music Technology. Today we're looking at the Taiga. Taiga is a 3-oscillator analog synthesizer from Pittsburgh Modular. Pittsburgh Modular have been on a strange journey. I mean, a few years ago they built the Voltage Research Lab, which is something that fascinated me, and I picked one of those up just after Super Booth in, was it 2019? And it seemed to be a very, very clever, very complex, very stylized, beautiful exploration of analog synthesis. But from that point, something changed at Pittsburgh and they went down some other road, and they have been exploring and discovering and expanding their minds towards something new, something interesting, pushing the boundaries, all these sorts of things. Richard Nichols of Pittsburgh Modular has been slowly releasing strange animalistically named modules over the last couple of years. Weird things, experimental things, and all of it very much limited edition, experimental, just a short run of something, as if they're trying to get somewhere, that there's a journey, that there's a destination ahead that they are trying these things out to get to. I mean, we saw a big protrusion of this with the East Beast and the West Pest. These fellas here, although built by Create Audio, the circuitry was designed by Pittsburgh Modular. And as you start getting into the Taiga, you can see how this really is a smashing of these two things together. The East Coast, the sumptuous gooiness of that filter, and the West Coast, the bending and folding, and that weird-ass dynamics thing they've got going on. And so we find all of that sort of poured into the Taiga. The oscillators over here folding, bending, warping, then mixing, and then through that fully sweet spotted filter. It just goes on and then it peaks and then it comes back and it's all there. Sweet spot at every turn, no low lifes, no dropouts, no wandering about in other directions. It's all solid, smooth and sweepable, which then falls itself into this dynamics thingamajig, this rigmarole over here, which doesn't quite sure whether it's opening or closing or bonging or binging or naturally responding or organically splattering. It's a whole little universe by itself, just in the dynamics. So what Pittsburgh appear to be doing is they're trying to push what analog can do. So on kind of initial inspection, a 3-oscillator monosynth, well, it's a bit like a mini Moog then, isn't it? Well, yeah, I mean, it is in as much as how the signal flow goes, but then the bits within it certainly are not. And in fact, to try to find a simple mini Moog sound takes a little bit of effort, because it's always wanting to fold, it's always wanting to bend, it always wants to find another path to something. And so through these avenues, through the normalization of the synth and through the enormous patch bay at the bottom, you find a synthesizer, or rather you discover a synthesizer somewhere in the undergrowth that's just delightfully weird. It's a bit odd, is what it is. You just keep finding layers upon layers. You find other tones and other timbres. You keep fiddling with it. Is it in tune? Is it out of tune? I don't know. I've got a picture. I don't know if it's going to go over here. There's a whole digital control system that just wants to mess it about, that throws in pseudo-random this and register the other, arpeggiators, randomization, sequencing. And a strange doorway into some kind of paraphonic paraphernalia. We will come on to that. We'll come on to that. But I think all we can do is dive in, have a play, see what sort of sounds we can get. I'll start off just by showing you the different sections, see how that goes, then we'll have a bit of a play, see if we can come up with some kind of idea about the scope of this. I mean, you should also go and listen to Richard's compositions on YouTube. He's done a number of tracks purely using the Taiga as a sound source, and they are fascinating. Weird, as I say, that is definitely a thing, because, you know, I mean, there's, like I say, it sounds a bit like the West Pest, but there's a stack of oscillators. It sounds a bit like the East Beast, but with all this folding and this dynamics weirdness going on. So you've got this kind of organic low pass gate vibe while still leaning heavily into a lovely gooey enveloped filter. And the low pass gate is also harmonically changing things, and you've got resonance in both of those areas, so you've got harmonics being messed with from all angles, which gives it this edge which is, it's unfamiliar, while the architecture feels very straightforward, and the places that we've been before, the sounds that you're getting out of it are not quite so much. So let me stop prattling on. Let's bring you in and let's have a look at it, a little bit at a time, step by step, and then have a bit of a play. Sorry, I got a little bit carried away there. Right, just so you know what's going on here. So this is the Taiga. Interesting, odd, colourful. It's using the same sort of knobs that came from the East-West and East-West Beast. What's it? It's in a 60 HP type layout. It can drop into your Eurorack. I've got this running through an audio interface into my Surface here just to show me a little bit of analysis. This is running the M Analyzer and M Oscilloscope from Melder Productions, as everybody always asks. I've also got a reverb over here from IK Multimedia, which I'm going to turn off for now. I might use it in demos later on. Taiga has its own analog echo. Which is interesting, but I'll turn that off too. So let's try to bring ourselves back to basics. So as you can see, probably 3 oscillators over here, a filter section, dynamic section with 2 envelopes in between. That's kind of it. That's the basic idea. So let's pull back to a single oscillator and just give that a bit of a look. So in the center here, you've got a mixer section. I'm going to turn down everything except for channel 1. Then you have to go around looking for all the bits that you've done, because this is an analog synth. There's no presets. You've just got to find what you're doing. I'm going to just normalize the scope so we can just see it at its biggest. So this is the waveform stretched a little bit, and it sort of distorts it a little, but we should get a better idea. So filters open, resonance is down. This should be essentially the closest you're going to get to a sine wave. So the way the oscillators work, you have 3. You've got pitch at the top. Now the oscillators are interesting. The range of their pitch manipulation when it's connected to MIDI is odd. This only really gives you a fine tune, whereas the other oscillators, if I bring in number 2 for a minute, that can go much further, and 3 goes differently. But let's just go back to 1 for the moment. We'll come to why that's useful in a minute. But the idea is you've got your pitch, you've then got frequency modulation, which you can run in directly from the LFO, if you so wish. So that's purely the LFO. It's got 2 ranges to it. But let's ignore that for now. And then you have your waveform section. Now the waveforms are generated through some kind of mystical warping. So you have this sine wave, but it's not entirely a sine wave. But then as you step through them, you do what's called seeding. So you're not really creating or switching to a particular waveform. You are seeding the ground for a particular sort of kind of approximation that's lending itself towards, very slowly, perhaps a bit like a sine wave. Now you have other waveforms here too, triangle, sawtooth and pulse, but it doesn't want to go there all in one go. So between each of these waveforms is another waveform where you've got the 2 of them sort of pushing against each other. So sine wave goes to sine wave plus triangle. So you get this different waveform going on. Move again purely to triangle. Yeah, that's there. Then you push from triangle into sawtooth, sort of a triangular sawtooth, and then that pushes into sawtooth by itself. Finally this pushes into pulse, or rather sawtooth pulse, and then pulse pulse, and then pulse sine. If you get the idea. When all of them are lit, you get a different one every time. Which is part of that really interesting a digital engine that's part of the Taiga architecture. And you may also remember that from the East Beast and West Pest. But of course, what's more important in here is this shaping knob. Now this is a wave folder which will fold your waveform 6 times. But of course it's not just going to fold the sine wave, it's going to fold the sine and triangle. It's going to fold the triangle sawtooth, the sawtooth square, and the square. Well, the square really does get to sort of pulse width modulation, but I imagine you were assuming that. So, as you know, as architectures go, you've got 3 lots of this. So each oscillator will behave in exactly the same way with exactly the same set of strangely warped waveforms that will fold in upon themselves to give you endless timbres. So let me bring the other 2 in just so we can see them running alongside each other. And this is where it starts to get interesting in terms of the tuning. So that's pretty close. And of course you can very easily, particularly using the very small range on the first oscillator, just to dial in a little bit of detuning. So what I found, here's a good tip, is if you just want to get back to some kind of normality, put everything at 12 o'clock and you're going to be near as damn it in tune. Then pick something kind of groovy down in the sawtooth sort of area, I would say. Start working your filter. So you can start from that very familiar 3-oscillator monosynth sound, and then start folding. I've talked about it before, how just smooth that is all the way around. Yeah, it's a lovely thing. So talking about the filter then, just moving over to this section here. You have, it's a multi-mode filter. You can swap between either low pass with band pass by itself. Band pass with high pass. High pass by itself. High pass and low pass. And then all three, which, like with the oscillators, gives you a different filter on every single step. And of course, if you chuck in every waveform, you have an extreme amount of variation and change that's going on purely in form of waveform and filter, all just doing its own thing. It's super nice. Now here you've got two envelopes. One envelope is attached to the filter, the other one is attached to the dynamics center, which is a weird fish, strange, different, but interesting. And I'm going to do my best to try to explain what the heck is going on with it. So it has 3 modes. You've got a VCA mode, which is what we're in at the moment. And so for the moment, all I've got is, this is your main VCA level knob that you can manually open, or you can open it with the envelope, which is normaled to this knob here. This is a Dynamics CV knob. So I've got my envelope 2, which is what is driving this. So attack, decay, sustain, and then release. Very simple. No trouble. Now the other modes are slightly more interesting, confusing, baffling, maybe could be the word, and that is the low pass gate mode. Now it will sound different, but you can use it kind of in the same way as well as sort of in a different way. Because now what's going on is in low pass gate mode is you've got a VCA combined with a filter in an interesting way, or at least that concept. I'm not sure whether Pittsburgh actually do that. I don't know. So whereas before in VCA mode, it's purely loudness that's changing. Now we have loudness and tone, because harmonics are tied up in this knob here too. So as I turn the dynamics knob, you can both see on the scope and hear those higher harmonics coming in and out. Now if I take my filter out of the equation entirely, you can see how that's working. So this is no longer anything to do with the filter. This is purely the dynamic section, which is very interesting. If I take the dynamics out and then just leave it on the envelope, it gives us this very lively really nice, I mean, organic, I guess, natural feel to the way the harmonics disappear as the sound does. And this is completely without the filter. Now I've boosted the low pass gate resonance all the way up just to emphasize it entirely. You can bring that down just to calm it down a little bit. Now if I bring the envelope down, we start sort of feeling that more traditional low pass gate feel. Where you have that woodiness to it, that thump to it. And the last mode is sort of low pass gate mode, but with a pluck. So it emphasizes that front edge to give you a real slap. A percussive edge, if you like. There it goes. Now if you wind the envelope down entirely, you're just left with the pop, the slap at the front. Oh, that's so squelchy, so wet, slapping you about. Now you can then add a little bit of envelope to it, and you don't lose the front edge. It just starts to add a bit more to it. So I mean that's the basic run of it. 3 oscillators mixed through a filter into those dynamics section, which adds this amazing amount of natural feel to everything, and you can go to the filter and back to the dynamics, or use them both, or alternately or differently. And then 2 envelopes running both of those things. You've got an LFO that you can run to all sorts of things, frequency modulation, the CV of the shape knob here. You can run it to the filter, you can run it to the dynamics, or even the resonance here. And that's just what we can see on the front panel. There's a lot of other stuff that can also happen down here. Now I must say that the patch bay isn't particularly well labelled. I mean it's labelled, but not in so much as it would tell you exactly what it is. You have to sort of start getting the hang of it. So this is this oscillator, and that uses this sort of section here, and this one uses sort of these ones here. The filter sort of uses these, or is it these ones, a bit of a kink. These, I mean you've got like 4 of them which are labelled in, but into what? It's difficult to say, but you get the hang of it. I mean those 2 are for that one, this is for that one. These, I don't know what that outfit's for, but this in is for, I don't actually know what that in is for, but hey, you can kind of discover it by dipping into the extremely detailed manual. The other thing that gives you a little bit of trouble is the brightness of the LEDs. At the moment I've got a lot of light on this, so it's not quite such a bother. But in normal light conditions, these are so bright that you can't actually see the icon next to them. And that can get a little bit frustrating. You can't exactly see what you're doing. But otherwise, the knobs are great. They're very steady, they're very in there, and they move very nicely. You do get a little bit of finger bumping, like if I'm moving the shape, I could also potentially move the FM, which is not always what you want, or you nudge the pitch. Well, let's talk about the digital section over here on the left, just for a little bit. It's got an arpeggiator that you can turn on. It's got a hold button, which is going to help with that. Got a little bit of randomization and change of mode. The arpeggiator just plays in the order that you put the notes in. Which is very, very simple. Or if you put it in hold and then hold the edit button at the bottom here, you can stick in a sequence of up to 32 notes. And if you shift hold, you can then transpose. Which is very cool. It might be simpler if I show that in a different way. And that sort of thing. It's cool. It's very, very usable. It's simple. It's not too buried. You're not having to dig around. I mean, once you know where things are, then it becomes more and more obvious. And I know it quite well now, just about, without having to refer to the manual on what things are doing. I can more or less find what I need. But all of this is kind of needing you to have a MIDI keyboard attached. And it is definitely, there's definitely a MIDI keyboard vibe going on. It wants to have that kind of interface. However, you can absolutely modularize the whole lot. I mean, every oscillator can be addressed individually like it was Eurorack, and you can drop this into your Eurorack and use them in exactly that way. MIDI be damned. It also has some interesting internal weirdness, which will help with that. So, for instance, this velocity output here, I mean, you can do all sorts of things with MIDI. You can take MIDI control numbers and scatter them around, or velocity and bits and pieces, and do lots of deep and interesting stuff. I'm not going to dwell on any of that. But one of the things that you can do is something called a shift register, or a pseudo-random shift register. And what that does, it uses one of the velocity outputs here to address one of the oscillators. So plug it into an oscillator, like so. And then I can change the sort of level of randomness through using the ARP button here, and it uses these lights here to show us what has been selected. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there's like 5 different options. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's all off, which is in normal mode. So if I turn on one of them, it will then start generating these random ideas. And I can also take the gate out, plug that into something over here to get that firing. Now I know what you're thinking, that sounds a bit weird. Yeah, it does. But we can also add to it, let's take out some sample and hold, plug that into the pitch of number 2. See, we're having a party. We could bring in 3 as a drone. Take the output of a square LFO, bring in the delay, add some reverb, and that sort of thing. Yeah, it can go into all sorts of weirdness through its own self. I mean, none of that was coming from the keyboard, that was all doing it by itself. So there's some interesting depths you can go to, and exploratory shift registering, moving about, random pseudo craziness, and then just patching things into each other in order to explore that deeper and further than you like. You can also run the oscillators in sync. I can take the sine output of number 1, plug that into the sync of number 2, take the sine output of number 2, plug it into the sync of number 3. You might also find that as you turn them all to about the same sort of place, they create these chords. Sort of unexpectedly. Another thing you can do if you think it's not feeling juicy enough, is you can run it through an inbuilt preamp. Which can give you 30 times gain, apparently, for some extra juiciness. So bringing in the SQ64 just briefly to put in 3 sequences. So I've got 3 pitches going into the 3 oscillators, all of which are doing something, you know, a little bit different potentially. Which brings us to possibly the last bit, which is the paraphonic playingness. I mean, I was playing sort of paraphonically using 3 oscillators separately through the filter. That was fine, but you can also do it over MIDI using this special velocity output thingamajig. At least I think so. So to get this to work, I need to select the right mode. So in this case, I want to have this bottom light lit. That one should be paraphonic mode. So now I should be able to take the velocity output here, patch that into the pitch input, and with a bit of luck, I've got two-note paraphonicness. That paraphonic mode is fascinating. Strange old boat, this one. The Taiga, Pittsburgh Modular. What do we think then? I mean, it's 3 oscillators, constantly bending and warping and folding in on themselves, moving, modulating. I mean, the 3 oscillators together, when you're playing it like a big hard bass line, you've got all of that sort of mogy stuff that you'd expect to find in any analog synthesizer, but then you've got this other stuff. You've got this, West Coast style stuff, the slappy, the pluck, that front end on things, and then that harmonic drip, that harmonic dying off at the end of a sound. You've got these 2 sort of systems that are playing with each other, that are one's finding one and then knocking into the other one. It's strange. It's unexpected. You're not always finding exactly what you think perhaps you should or you might. It's like each time you sit and play with it, it becomes an exploration. It's not a mini Moog that you dial it in and go, yeah, okay, there's my bass line. You couldn't do that, sure, but then you just go, I just want to turn that, oh, that's nice, and then you follow it on this journey of niceness, because each knob takes you to another sort of sweet spot, and you're going, well, that's quite nice. That's nice also. At which point do I say, this is a good patch, I'm going to remember this one? I don't know that you ever get to that point, because you're always finding that it could do something else. And then once again you find sweetness from within the terror, from within the chaos and the modulation and the changing and the bending and the warping. You find something really nice. And on and round and round in circles of synthesisness and playingness and 3 oscillator gorgeousness, rooting through that fantastically sweet spot endowed filter, then being played with and tickled and its belly rubbed by the dynamics. Great! What's not to like about all of that? Fantastic! I would perhaps say that because it is on the weird side, because it is unexpected and surprising, it's not necessarily going to be as instant as perhaps another more familiar mini Moog-esque type synthesizer will be. You might struggle to start with trying to work out how you tune those oscillators to each other. You might scratch your head over the dynamics a little bit, going, how does the envelope relate to that exactly, and which knob am I trying to pull that together? You might get confused in the patch bay over the labeling or exactly what it is that's finding its way to each other. So it has a little bit of learning involved. You do need to have a look through the manual. You do need to spend some time thinking about how those bits work, how that routes to there, and why that doesn't perhaps do the thing that you thought it might. but ultimately this is analog synthesis, and analog synthesis is going to work in a way that you expect it to most of the time. Once you've understood the concepts, once you've understood the routing, then it will really start to open up and reveal itself to you. There's no end of fun to be had in the shaping tools. I mean, that's brilliant every time. Filter feels lovely, sits there nicely, but it's really the dynamics. And the dynamic side has baffled me a bit. And I've sort of sat down and wondered about it. Am I using it right? Is it doing what I think? But then in use, in rehearsing this and making this video and working through it, it just becomes really interesting how you can go from these big movements. I'm not using the filter, I'm just using that, which is shifting harmonics around, which then brings it back into this woody slapness. And, when I wasn't really looking for that, but that's what I found. And so you don't normally find yourself journeying through VCAs, particularly. You tend to do all your crafting and your sculpting with the filter. With filtering, I'm fighting with the filter and the envelope amount. Those three things are sort of playing with each other, and I'm tweaking one and then tweaking the other, then tweaking the other. And all those things are leaning into each other and affect the sound that you're getting. You have a similar experience with the dynamics, where you've got the envelope 2 going to it through this dynamic CV knob amount here, which controls how much that opens, and whether you want that to be fully closed at the end of a thing, or whether you want some of that coming through so you benefit from an ongoing sound as well as the movement that opens it up. And you can hear those harmonics moving about. Really interesting. I mean, I first got to understand that a little bit through the West Pest, and it definitely follows through in here, but it feels more together because you've got more of a sound going through it. You've got lots of wave folding that's being squished together to find its way through there. So incredibly rich waveforms, incredibly animated waveforms that are going through it. That's really, it's it's stuffing itself through this dynamics engine, which is squeezing it and loving everything that it's doing. It's really interesting. And if there's one thing it lacks, perhaps it's the ability to play it as an instrument from control voltage. I can address each oscillator individually with CV and gate, but I can't play the whole instrument with CV and gate. So that makes sense. I can only do that via MIDI, and that's a bit of a shame. The little digital control center over here is useful, more useful, I think, than on the East Beast and West Pest. I think this has been streamlined. It's been sort of reined in a little bit so that it's just simpler, and the ARP is good, transposition is good, the little pseudo random stuff that it can produce is good. Those are really helpful, useful things. And then at the end, that paraphonic sort of nonsense, it really does add a whole extra dimension when once you've massaged it into what you're after, I think. Yeah. So there you go, the Taiga from Pittsburgh Modular. I don't think this is the final destination, I think they're journeying further. I think they're going to be taking this to other places, and that's really exciting because where we are now is flipping good. Really nice. So I hope that was useful, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.